we're going to focus on a crisis that most in the news media keep trying to ignore, the fentanyl/illegal drug crisis, because it is significant. It is devastating. And it is part of a international strategy by China, not New Mexico. We talk about the Mexican drug cartels all the time, but part of a national strategy by China to destabilize the United States. That's according to experts. The FBI director has raised this question today. You're going to hear from the former chief of special operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration. He led the war on drugs for a very long time in its most sensitive job as director of special operations. Derek Maltz Sr. is going to be with us, and we're going to talk about China as conducting a chemical warfare strategy against the United States, fentanyl being the main one. But now, as we saw in Maine over the weekend, China is getting involved in pushing marijuana. Why? Because if you produce a lot of illegal marijuana and then you distribute it, it's a gateway drug. And over time, people move from marijuana to other more dangerous drugs. And you're going to hear Derek Maltz talk about this. He has said it. You're going to hear it today. China is not by accident getting into these drug businesses in the United States on U.S. soil. What am I talking about? Well, over the last couple of days, law enforcement raided an illegal industrial scale marijuana growing operation in Wilton, Maine. In fact, this just happened yesterday. So just a day ago, at the time, a man who identified himself as the general manager of the property confirmed that the site was a marijuana grower that paid $30,000 a month in rent. So it's well funded, right? It appears that some of the individuals who are apprehended have connections to China in transnational organized crime. That's what we're hearing from the Department of Homeland Security. This was a major bust, but what's most major about it? It's tied to China. That's right. It's tied to China. And it's not unlike what's been found in California, in Washington, New York State, Massachusetts. China is getting in big with not only the drug cartels in Mexico, not only with fentanyl, the most lethal of the drugs out there today, or one of the most lethal of the drugs out there today that they're pushing in America, marijuana and other illicit drug trade. Also there because, as Derek Maltz is going to tell you in a second, it's part of a larger destabilization strategy for China. Important stuff. We can't underestimate how important this is and how weak the Biden administration and the U.S. government's response has been. All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm going to be part of a very special event airing Sunday at 3 p.m. on Real America's Voice, The Lost Voices of Fentanyl. It's a family event. We're going to host it here at the Just the News Real America Voice headquarters in Washington, D.C. Families who've lost loved ones to one of the greatest chemical attacks in American history, the fentanyl poisoning that is spreading across our country at a rate that alarms anyone that I know in law enforcement and in the medical world. One of the great organizers of that event and one of the great voices speaking out about just how bad it is, the fentanyl crisis, literally a nationwide epidemic, is Derek Maltz Sr. He's the retired director of special operations for the great Drug Enforcement Administration, and today, one of the most important voices trying to combat the fentanyl crisis, and he joins us right now. Derek, good to have you back on the show.
Thank you, John. I appreciate all the work you're doing to help spread the awareness and save lives.
We have to. We cannot stop talking about this because it's so easy to get complacent, and we just can't let that happen. And it seems to me, as we look out across the landscape, particularly since in the last 2 or 3 years under Joe Biden with a more insecure border, that the signs of the illicit drug trade accelerating are growing by day. Some pretty big law enforcement actions yesterday in Wilton, Maine, not a place that you would think of as a hotbed of drug trafficking, but law enforcement raids an illegal industrial scale marijuana growing operation there. Another sign that the drug cartels and their allies in the United States, they're thriving, aren't they?
Yes, John, but that one goes even a bit even more deep when you look at the Chinese Communist Party and you look at the role of China and their criminal networks in the overall drug crisis in America. Because people are not connecting the dots, John. This is way bigger than just a bunch of, illegal selling marijuana up in Maine. First of all, it's all over the country. It's not just Maine. Oklahoma, Oregon, Washington State, California, and, all different states. But
Massachusetts, I think, too, right?
Massachusetts. But Chris Wray, he's the FBI director. Whether you like him or not, he said the following, that the greatest long-term threat to our national security is that posed by the Chinese Chinese Communist government. So what the hell does America think is going on when these illegals are coming in at record levels in fiscal year 23? They apprehended illegally over 24,000 Chinese nationals. Most of them, I'm being told, are military-age men. Now, they already have over 4,400, captured in the month of October of this year. So they're going into these different cities. They're setting up not just marijuana grow operations, but counterintelligence operations. But John, the worst part that people are not connecting is that all over America every day, Chinese nationals are picking up large sums of cash from the Mexican cartel operatives all over the country, and the cash is being turned over to Chinese businessmen who are using the cash to launder money for the cartels seamlessly, but to use that to buy real estate, property, invest in different operations like these grow operations. So it's a disaster at many levels, and it's well beyond the drug crisis.
So we have communist China, getting involved in the drug trade and then taking the illicit proceeds to probably carry out whatever their national security or foreign policy agenda is and weakening in America. This is any doubt in your mind that this is a concerted Chinese government effort behind this?
John, there is no doubt in my mind. And speaking to experts who worked in China, they said that nothing goes on without the CCP's approval. Like, you don't just send kids to America on visas without CCP authorizing it. That's why some of these kids that are here on visas are picking up the cash. We also know that Chinese businessmen cannot export, I believe it's still $50,000 a year outside of China. They need the cash. That's also why last year there was a big report out of, I think, the Washington Times about Washington Examiner, I can't remember, about the $6.1 billion in transactions in America for like a year period of time. 58% of those transactions were done in cash by Chinese businessmen. So where the hell do they think the money's coming from? From the Mexican cartels, as they're poisoning our country at record levels. And by the way, John, I cannot prove this in court, but I've been doing this a long time. I talk to a lot of people daily. I'll also say to you, I believe that they recognize that the weak marijuana laws in America and this passive attitude about, oh, marijuana is safe, it's okay to smoke pot. Now they're creating this very pure THC marijuana that's distorting the brains of American citizens. If you look at some of the medical reports that have come out, like the Wall Street Journal recent report regarding the school shooters and their obsessive marijuana appetite. I'm not suggesting that the Chinese caused the school shooting. I'm just saying that from a strategic plan of the CCP, it's a brilliant concept that if we can get into America and sell this very pure marijuana and destroy Americans' brains so then they go to pills and other drugs, that's a brilliant unrestricted warfare. That's my opinion, John.
Yeah, no, listen, you're on to something bigger. And you have come on the show before and done such a great job of describing the role that China and Chinese companies have played in the facilitation of the precursors that the drug cartels then use into the fentanyl production supply chain. But in addition to that, now you see them, it's marijuana. It's basically they're trying to get Americans hooked on drugs, then take the cash of Americans being hooked on drugs and use it for some geopolitical advantage that they're gaining against the United States. Do you see anyone in the United States government, in the Biden administration, executing a strategy at the breadth and seriousness that the actual threat is right now?
I don't see it. I know that law enforcement, I know specifically the DEA, I know Homeland Security Investigations, I know CBP, I know FBI is helping out as well to try to identify these links, look at the money launderers, and they do have some operations focused on Chinese organized crime because there's a lot of violence associated with this marijuana business as well. But let me go back to something really important because you've been paying attention. You actually listen, and I appreciate that. You know the national security issues very well, John, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on your show. But here's the point. Remember, when I was sitting in the Special Operations Division in 2008, 2009, 2010, up until 2014, I watched the Chinese criminals send the K2, the spice, and the bath salts out of the labs in China, like Wuhan and other labs that we identified. They were making poisonous chemicals And we call it synthetic cannabinoids and cathinones going back to 2008, 2009. Then they switched over to fentanyl. They've been doing the chemicals for precursor chemicals for methamphetamine and now fentanyl. They've been doing that for years. Like, they go back with relationships with the cartels for 30, 40 years on the precursor chemicals. So it's not just marijuana. It's not just the precursors for fentanyl. Now we have the xylazine, the horse tranquilizer, coming out of these labs in China. I believe that's another phase of the chemical attack on America. And they're trying to destabilize the country. And they're doing a pretty damn good job, John, because no one's putting all these things together and attacking it very aggressively. It hurts when you have a wide open border.
When you looked at the summit that President Biden had with President Xi a few weeks ago, yeah, there was a little discussion about a deal to stop the flow of precursors from China to the cartels, but nothing of the language or severity or acknowledgement that China's trying to do this and it's part of a strategy. Was that a missed opportunity for President Biden to take on China and say, listen, you're going to stop poisoning our children, you're going to stop running illegal drugs in our country, or you're not going to get and put something on the table that tells China you're going to get punished if you do this?
But again, he was reading off note cards that his staff has provided him. I was falling asleep watching that particular press briefing. But let me bring up another point that's very relevant to this discussion, John, that you may not know. So I participated down in the DEA's largest ever international drug enforcement conference in Jamaica 2 months ago. 130 countries. The administrator from DEA was there. She was very, very passionate about the deaths in America from fentanyl. She was showing her exhibit, Faces of Fentanyl, in DEA lobby. But here's the point, John. Guess what country didn't show up? Mexico. Why does America allow them to get away with that? Why does State Department provide any money to Mexico if they can stand in the face of all the law enforcement in America and all the families losing loved ones, and there's no accountability that they weren't there? The one partner that the DEA needs right now and the country needs is Mexico to get aligned with us on attacking those cartels. And they didn't show up. And nobody even talks about this, John. I put out a video when I was down there. You know, it got a little bit of attention, but that's a very serious point to me at the highest levels of failures in the U.S. government.
Yeah, at a time where strong leadership is required, we're not seeing much of it at all, particularly on this front. And an entire generation of young Americans is expiring in front of us or having their lives derailed at the very least. If they're not being killed by the drugs, they're getting hooked in a way that sets them on a course for less than optimum success. It really is remarkable, and it can't be an accident. We know China is intending to do this. I want to turn to a second to the TV special, because seeing and hearing from people who have had their lives altered by this epidemic is so powerful. But before we get there, the history of China. There have been earlier agreements with China to address fentanyl and other things. China doesn't ever really comply with these agreements, do they?
No, I mean, they just kind of, it's like whack-a-mole, John. They change chemicals that are not illegal, right? They play games. Saw that with the K2, the spice, and some of these bath salts, because they weren't technically illegal. So they play games. It's all a, strategic plan. I keep saying that because it's way bigger than just trying to make some money. Yeah, the cartels are trying to maximize their profits. They're a global, faceted business enterprise. They want to make money, and they're selling drugs to make money, and they're trying to get people addicted to these powerful drugs. But in China, there's a much more nefarious, strategic concept on how they can destabilize and destroy America's power by undermining their future generation. John, have you looked recently on all the military members that are dying from fentanyl poisoning? It's like supposedly record-breaking deaths in the military, right? And the younger generation. But in regards to China, to me, it's a much more complex strategic plan on destabilizing us. But they're very clever because they're operating now all over our country. They got into our country. Now they've set up operations here. So it's very difficult to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, particularly when your government isn't looking for it and trying to put them together. All right, folks, more with our exclusive interview with Derek Maltz in just a second.
And here's your prescription.
I know just the pharmacy to get this filled.
Who are you?
A pharmacy benefit manager. A middleman your insurer uses to decide which medicines you can get, what you pay, and sometimes even which pharmacy you should go to.
Why can't I go to a pharmacy in my neighborhood?
Because I make more money when you go to a pharmacy I own.
No one should stand between you and your medicine. Visit phrma.org/middleman to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
And now, a word from our sponsor, Robinhood. If you're listening to this pod, you probably already know how to make your money do more. You got at least one retirement fund, maybe some investments in the mix. But what about your idle cash? Still earning a low rate? That cash could be making you more with Robinhood Gold. You can earn up to 5% APY, which is 8 times the national savings rate for most banks, which means that uninvested $5, $10, or $20,000 just sitting in your account can be making money that makes more money. What's more, that money stays protected for up to $2.25 million in FDIC insurance through our partner banks. Make your money do the most for just $5 a month with Robinhood Gold. Get 30 days free when you sign up at Robinhood.com/goldpodcast. As of 9/21/23 via Bankrate, interest is earned on idle cash swept from your brokerage account to program banks. Cash sweep program and Gold are offered through Robinhood Financial LLC. Terms apply. Rate may change. Robinhood is not a bank.
All right, folks, more with our exclusive interview with Derek Maltz. There is a very disturbing story, and it's not quite illegal drug trade, but it's just as scary. In the last couple of weeks, authorities rolled up a illegal biolab in California that was clearly tied to China again. And some of the lawmakers who investigated have told us, we called the FBI, we called the CDC, and they didn't act. We literally had to work with local authorities because the FBI and CDC didn't have the curiosity to look at this. If there are deadly pathogens in an illegal lab or inappropriate lab out in California tied to China, plus the drug trade, and the FBI and CDC aren't engaged, your first line of defense has already been taken down. What learnings are there from that biolab situation in California? What does it say about the larger vigilance that our government does or doesn't have right now?
Like I said, John, they're not connecting the dots of the larger strategic threat against our national security, right? If you look at just the border situation alone, we have no idea how many Chinese, bad guys are in our country, because the the southern border, we have the northern border, which is under-resourced and wide open. We have the gotaways, which they're now saying 1.8 million gotaways, since Biden took office. So we don't know who's here. But the other thing that scares me a little bit, John, is that the report out of Maine, there's some very aggressive reporters, Jenny Tare and the guy from the Maine Wire. They're out there, Steve Robinson, I think his name is. They're out there going to these residents and they're talking to these Chinese males and females, but they have some really, huge demands for electricity in these locations, which is common for a marijuana grow. But they have cameras and sensors on the roads, so they're watching traffic of people. They're up in the rural areas of Maine, but we know they're all over the country. We don't know what the hell they're doing in these locations. We think it's marijuana grow. Yeah, I'm sure there's some that are marijuana grow. Maybe they're all marijuana grow. But what other nefarious planning are they doing, especially with all of these new Chinese nationals coming in from the southern border? That's the scary part. So, CDC basically is dysfunctional because right now they're not even putting out accurate and timely statistics on the fentanyl poisonings, the fentanyl deaths. John, here's another thing. How are we supposed to address the fentanyl crisis when we don't even put together the data needed? So as an example, how many fire and rescue companies are going out right now as we're speaking to save people with Narcan? We have no national statistics on how many lives have been saved from Narcan. Thank God for Narcan. But if I was in charge, that's something I want to collect across every state so I can see the magnitude of people that are getting poisoned by fentanyl. Second thing is, we all know during COVID, every day we turned on the TV, didn't matter what station, COVID cases, COVID deaths, right? Now, we can't even determine with any certainty how many fentanyl poisonings, how many deaths. I know last week on the streets of Denver, there were 4 dead Americans on the streets of Denver within a 24-hour period. It's happening all over, these mass poisonings. We don't have any freaking stats because CDC's asleep at the switch. In regards to FBI, the problem that's always been occurring in law enforcement, and I live this nightmare, and I could go on all day, the synchronization of effort when we look at terrorism targets and criminal targets. We don't put the pieces together always that well because there's silos up between these compartmentalized, philosophies and, strategic. But now we know that the terrorists or the really bad actors like China, they're tapping into the proceeds of drug crimes to get money to operate, to set up operations, to set up counterintelligence, for travel, for logistics. We know that across the board. We saw it with Hezbollah. So we're not doing a great job of breaking down the walls. And that goes back, again, to lack of leadership and lack of knowledge of the current crisis that we face.
It is a remarkable time. And do you think that the CDC is incompetent? That's why they're not counting it? Or do they not want the breadth of the fentanyl drug crisis to be apparent for political reasons?
Definitely think a lot of it has to do with political reasons because it all comes back to the wide open border and the impunity that the Mexican cartels get to operate. And also the Chinese issue is very, very political, especially when you look at the deals the president's son has had with China and all this money coming in. It's very, very political. But I also think there's a level of incompetence because why would you not want to tell the American public how many people are dying and getting poisoned by a chemical substance coming in from labs in China or in Mexico or other parts of the world, Canada, for example? We know that there's fentanyl processing labs up there as well. So why would your government not want to tell the American public when they're seeing 1-year-olds die? Like the kid in New York went to the daycare center and got fentanyl on his hands and dies, right? So why would that be okay for anyone? The number one job, like you said, John, of the government is to protect the citizens.
Yeah, no, it is remarkable. And in some ways, it's actually demoralizing. I've heard a lot of people use the word demoralizing in the last few years, that the big issues of the time simply aren't being addressed. And I think you can understand that demoralization when you walk through literally what's been going on here the last few months in the fentanyl crisis. I want to turn for a second to Sunday Special, which is great. We're really looking forward to having you here in Washington and all these extraordinary families who have suffered the ultimate loss to what is one of the greatest chemical attacks in American history. There's nothing like looking into the eye of someone who lost a daughter, a son, a spouse, a nephew, a niece. It just is so much more powerful than some statistic can do. But these families really have been through hell. And despite that, they have taken that negative experience and they're like, we want to save other families from having to go through what we have. Talk about some of the gains that families have been able to make, victims and survivors of the fentanyl crisis, the sort of things they've been able to do to get attention where the government has oftentimes refused to give attention.
Well, that's a great question, John. And that kind of is what keeps me fired up every day and inspired to continue because I work with the families, because I listen to the stories. It's heartbreaking, one after another. They're all very unique, and many of them are, different in certain ways. But at the end of the day, the number one thing that comes out all the time is that most of these families never even knew what fentanyl was. So the government failed in the messaging, right? The education isn't there at the youngest levels, right? That's why these 13-year-old kids are going on the computer, ordering up a pill on Snapchat, and they're dying. But what the families are doing that the government's not doing is there's an army out there. There's nonprofits all over the country. They're making films. They're doing education in schools, virtual education. They are doing, events in the schools where they go in and they give them, educational materials. They're creating websites. There's so many good Americans out there that are putting the grief into action. It's hard not to support them. And I know you and your organization, your media network, have been personally invested to help these families, and we all appreciate that. We look forward to Sunday. But I got to tell you, it's very sad, though, again, the failure of the government. The White House should be declaring a national security public health emergency, all hands on deck to address this crisis. Instead, we're taking it lightly, and the families are picking up the slack. So we have to unite with the families and provide whatever support we can, and that's what I've been doing for the last several years.
Well, that support, your work, and Derek, you've been tireless. You are, when I think of this crisis, you are the leading tip of the spear. You are always reminding people. But there's been some big wins. The U.S. Senate passed a resolution designating August 21st, 2023 as Fentanyl Prevention and Awareness Day. That's a big deal. When the U.S. Senate declares a whole day of recognition of it, you have your rally every year in September, right? The annual national rally in the mall. It seems as though at least awareness has grown a lot more in the last couple of years because of your tireless efforts and because of the survivor families' tireless efforts. What are the next steps? What do these families, what do future victims who don't even know they're going to be victimized by fentanyl yet, what do they need in the next 6 months to a year from the government, from Congress, from the White House?
Okay, suppose I was in the White House today. I would be holding a summit tomorrow. I'd be inviting professional athletes, celebrity role models, influencers to the White House to educate them on what the real crisis is now. This isn't about just smoking a joint with your buddies. This is about a mass poisoning on our kids. So these role models, they're going to care about that if they truly understand it. And then we're going to actually do video reels, like mass amounts of video reels. We're going to flood social media with these video reels of people the kids are looking up to. So they get educated about why this is different and what they need to learn. So we need the government support to do that, because right now the athletes, the celebrities, the influencers, most of them are ignoring it. There is a really good leader, San Francisco Giants, Logan Webb. He lost his cousin, Cade Webb, 2 years ago. He's going out to schools. He's doing videos. He's educating the youth about this poisoning. But you know what? He's one guy. I know Emmitt Smith, who I followed forever, a legendary running back, Dallas Cowboys. He's out there now educating on this crisis. The problem with Emmitt Smith is that the kids that are 18 years old, they don't know Emmitt Smith. He wasn't playing when they followed him. We need the current leaders, Tom Brady, LeBron James, the J.J. Watts of the world, the Steph Currys of the world, the athletes, swimmers. We need all of them to come out of the woodwork. Then the kids are going to get the message. Right now, the kids are just winging it. They're taking pills from each other. Their parents aren't engaging. And so it is getting better, though, John, I have to say, but it's way too slow for me, because every day 300 plus are dying. That's not acceptable. We can't be waving the victory flags. And unfortunately, Joe Biden, 3 years to have that kind of press that he did the other day. That's only because we're a year from the election, and he wants to, deceive the public again that he's actually caring about the fentanyl crisis. By the way, John, last thing on this, because I got to make this point. He said during that conference he wants to do whatever he can to deal with this and prevent this, and whatever words he used. How about starting with shutting down the border, because it's all coming from Mexico right now? Wouldn't that be a wise decision for Mr. President to make, John?
It would. Listen, it is so important right now, and the flow through an insecure border that we believe from the law enforcement we've talked to, that some of the illegal drug mills that the Chinese are operating are from people who snuck across the border. That's how they got into the country. We know that. We know that fentanyl and the drug cartels control operationally large parts of the border. That's not our statement. That's actually the Border Patrol chief's statement. So if you want to solve this large of a crisis, it seems like closing the border is the first thing you could do. That would have a profound effect, and yet it's not on anyone's table in the Biden administration right now. How important is it that there's a discussion right now, at least Marjorie Taylor Greene's been doing this, of trying to keep repeatedly putting articles of impeachment against Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, because he really is the persona that represents this really dangerous border policies. Even if it doesn't succeed, is just having that issue in front of the people meaningful?
Very important. So let me tell you, John, I'm part of Border 911 now with Tom Holman, Mark Morgan, Rodney Scott, Sarah Carter, Jason Jones, and Victor Villa. It's a new organization, border911.com. But here's the point of that. These guys helped the last administration create the safest border in my lifetime. Now, that being said, I listened to them and I learned from them because they're the experts. They deal with the people on the ground. They briefed these people in the administration. They told them what was going to happen if they reversed, remain in Mexico policy, and they didn't deal with the catch and release bull crap, right? They educated them, and this administration, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, just disregarded what they had to say. That in itself, in my opinion, is complete negligence, right? You can't come in to a job like that and just disregard what the previous administration said when you're talking about national security and public safety. Those dedicated guys, those three guys I just mentioned specifically, Rodney, Tom, and Mark, they have like combined 130 or 40 years of law enforcement. They worked on the border, and they have very, very, successful careers. And for him to neglect and just turn their policies aside is completely fathomable. But here's the thing, John. He, I'm being told, is not a dumb guy. So he is deliberately doing this, and that's really what's scary to me and should be scary to everyone in America, regardless of who you voted for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important to point out. Derek, you do such amazing work. We're going to be very excited to be part of this special that airs 3 o'clock to 5 p.m., 3 p.m., 5 p.m. on Sunday on Real America's Voice. You know where to find that, guys. You watch my show there every night. Derek, for people who want to stay in touch with your efforts, who want to donate or get involved or volunteer, what is the best way for them to coordinate with you?
Water911.com is a good place to donate, because what we're doing is putting facts out to the American public so they can make educated decisions on their politicians on the local side all the way to the top. Found on my Twitter, Derek Maltz _senior. I also have a Facebook group, National Security, Public Safety. But Lost Voices of Fentanyl is another very, very important, grassroots movement. 32,000 members now in the group. When I started with them, there was like 500, 600. So we need some money. They have a lot of expenses to go around the country and do the rallies and do the education, the travel. So, yeah, those are really good causes. There's other organizations facing fentanyl, Song for Charlie, Families Against Fentanyl. They're all over the place, and I post this stuff on a regular basis, but I appreciate that, John.
Well, these are all important causes, and they wouldn't exist if it weren't for your tireless efforts, Derek. You really are an American hero. When the government has failed to step in, you filled that void tirelessly, you and now the families, and you're creating action even in the absence of action by our government. That is an impressive thing to watch. As a reporter, been here a long time, I haven't seen a movement like this in a very long time. So congratulations and thank you from a grateful nation for what you're doing for us.
John, one last thing. Ronald Reagan once said, you can't get them to see the light, make them feel the heat. So we're going to try our best to make sure these people, when they take over this government in these high-level jobs, it's a very important responsibility, and they can't neglect it because our future is fading away.
That's exactly right. The thermostat is arising, thanks to Derek Maltz and all of his great efforts. Derek, what a great honor to have you on today. Thanks so much.
See you later, John. Thank you very much. Appreciate your efforts.